Welcome everybody to Samudra Shakti Online. I am Lisa Long and I am glad that you are here and tuning in. So our agenda tonight is, there's a little bit of background on Samudra Shakti. We'll have the presentation from Julia Pearring. We have a survey and some Q&A. So how did Samudra Shakti come into being, this online version? It came into being from a live event in Colorado in the fall of 2019. We had a planning committee that co-created it. We worked over a year on that live event. And you're seeing those four members of the planning team: Deb Payne, who's in Arizona; myself, Lisa Long, I'm in Jacksonville, Florida; Maduri Martin, who's in Colorado; and Kim Friedman, who's in the Northeast and is also our operations team coordinator for the Global School of Anusara School of Hatha Yoga. So that team co-created Samudra Shakti, and we wanted to keep the energy alive. Tonight, we have Julia Pearring presenting, and she's presenting Ankle Loop and Open to Grace. Julia was first introduced to Anusara Yoga in 2005 and completed her first training in 2008. She is an ECAT, which is an experienced certified Anusara yoga teacher, and a yoga therapist with the International Association of Yoga Teachers. She finds her purpose as a yoga teacher in supporting students in the exploration of their optimal range, with the intention to uncover the strength and potential of a deeper alignment, no matter the range of movement. She has intensely studied anatomy, kinesthesiology, and physiology, and she loves to develop fresh and exciting continuing education courses and teacher training modules. She strongly believes that active sadhana, basing one's personal practice on self-inquiry and a compassionate process, is invaluable for yoga teachers and practitioners. Julia lives and teaches in New York City, where she has built a thriving private therapeutic yoga practice. She is the managing director of the almost 50-year-old World Yoga Center, and she has recently supported the creation of the new Anusara Yoga Therapeutics Manual, which is coming out soon. So I'm going to turn this over to Julia. I'm muting my microphone.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. Ankle Loop and Open to Grace has been a revelation that's come over many years, and kind of without knowing it, 2016 at Samavesha in Mount Madonna, I taught 2 workshops on lower body loops and upper body loops, and even right before that, I got to teach an advanced class, and I, was already super clear I was going to do, thigh loop and pelvic loop for lower body, and kidney loop and shoulder loop for upper body. And I'm like, all right, well, what comes before that? What's the really advanced class to come before? I'm like, let's do all ankle loop. And the truth of ankle loop and Open to Grace, their connection is already in my mind, and I wasn't sure how clear it would come across, and it had its life there, and I've continued to explore it. So I want to start with, in some ways, how I would get to this, because I am very, I'm in some ways a purist. I love the principles exactly how they are. I love the sequential nature about them. I love the way that I learned them, and ankle loop is an organic principle, in that the 7 loops being a refinement of the 5, each one of the 7 loops can be linked with either Open to Grace, muscle energy, inner spiral, outer spiral, or organic energy. And ankle loop is paired with organic energy, and it's a great organic energy expression. So I love that about it. But there was a time where I was really focusing on the upper body loops and enjoying how kidney loop as an Open to Grace principle led to shoulder loop, which was a muscle energy principle, led to skull loop, which was an organic energy principle. So there was a way in which, by moving through those 3, I got to move through the whole sequence of Open to Grace, muscle energy, and organic energy. And it became a way into teaching the loops, because I could focus on those three and in some ways get all the way through the principles and not feel too encumbered by anything else that I had to talk about, really. I could get open to grace in, muscle energy and organic energy, and they unfolded in that way, because the loops, the one that you initiate will lead to the next one, in some ways beginning. So they're sequential in that way as well. So there was a moment where I was like, well, what about the lower body? There was some like, well, it doesn't really fit, ankle loop is an organic principle. But the more I looked at it, the next principle, shin loop, is muscle energy. And then we get to thigh loop, which is organized with inner spiral. And then we get to pelvic loop, which is organized with outer spiral. And I like to get a little geeky with things. And one way I like to speak about inner and outer spiral, we know in some ways that they arise from muscle energy and organic energy. So I love the way that inner spiral is in some way a culmination, or kind of the fulfillment of muscle energy. Once you get muscle energy, if you want to refine it, there's a broadening that happens as you get to the focal point. And I felt the same thing, the connection between shin loop and thigh loop, really opening up the deep pelvic area. So I'm like, all right, well, these are both kind of muscle energy oriented. And so then pelvic loop is next. And outer spiral also, if you only do three, from muscle energy, you go to organic energy. And for me, outer spiral is a way that kind of initiates or sets, it's the fire, right? So it has this kind of initiatory action of what organic energy can bring about. So in pelvic loop was so that for me, the way that it really gets the pelvis set down and it starts to extend the energy towards the feet. I'm like, all right, well, we have muscle energy and organic energy then, if we work with shin loop, thigh loop, and pelvic loop. And wait a minute, ankle loop, like that's all about foundation. And also it's the first one we do. Ankle loop is the one, because it's at the bottom, by initiating ankle loop, you set off like the cogwheel as let me pull out I hope you can see this somewhat. As you initiate, and here I have the arrows here, this is how you start. So from the middle of the ankle, you pull back, and ankle loop will send you down. And that will also set off like a cog. It'll send off shin loop going in the opposite direction with this arrow coming up. And that will set off then the next round of loops as well. So we have this way in which it's not only foundational, but it's where you begin. And we begin with open to grace. And, open to grace, it's like if you're going to do one thing, right, open to grace, it will all unfold from there. That's the beauty of the sequence. So I started to really play with open to grace as a way of setting off the UPAs of alignment, especially in the lower body. So similar to where in the upper body, I can do kidney loop, shoulder loop, and skull loop, and I have this whole movement from open to grace to organic energy. I started to really, really enjoy, if I initiated ankle loop, I really found ways to get it to activate. Shin loop arose naturally from there. And even though there's a new initiation point for thigh loop, drawing the upper thigh back, this big lift of the quads also has they have these directionalities towards the focal point, like muscle energy. So I could really feel how the back of the shin could engage towards the focal point, could really get the quads to engage towards the focal point, and then pelvic loop could come on top and initiate with its association with outer spiral, that movement of organic energy back to the base, and then the ankle loop is right there to support that as well. So then if you take the whole body, you initiate with pelvic loop, you then extend these two ends away from each other. So I'm also totally down. I'm a purist. I really, really believe that ankle loop is organic extension. It's so good in the way as you initiate this kind of outer spiral that initiates organic energy, that it leads to these two ends reaching away from one another. And yet it's, in the same way that we end with then organic energy, what do we do when we end? We're actually not done. We just, again, open to grace. So in the same way we finish with this reach, we then begin again to initiate the ankle loop, to bring about these big, really strong movements towards muscle energy, which in most in standing poses is moving against gravity to get to the focal point. And so we have the potential then, as I wanted, the simplicity in some ways that I had in the upper body, that if I teach the lower body loops, I can begin with open to grace and get all the way to organic energy, and be able to stay in this unfoldment of these refinements. So it's one of the things that I like to invite, especially for newer teachers, but actually not just for newer teachers, for all of us. Because there's a way in which pelvic loop can work with inner and outer spiral, all of these, but to work with these and have ankle and shin loop arise. In some ways we have then these initiation points of the middle ankle drawing back and two things happening. And then the top of the thigh moving back, and then thigh loop and reverse pelvic loop happening. And then you have one more initiation point, the activation of the waistline drawing back, and you have your pelvic loop, and you can extend very strongly again towards the base of the pose and also rise up from there. So it gave me an easy and effective way of doing the loops in the lower body and having that be the whole class. Every, of course, at least every planned articulation and verbal assist I would do. There's always everything else to support individuals and what arises. But in terms of then, even with theme, to be able to really link that movement and uprising, or what does it mean in open to grace to really find the leg as a support structure, and how do we start with foundation? So the reality, the two main points that gave me some conviction here was that open to grace is a foundational one, and the feet as foundation is a good place to start. And this is a bit of a re-articulating, but also the second one is that we begin with open to grace, and that leads us to the unfoldment of the other principles. It's where we begin, and ankle loop is where we begin with the loops. So that's what gave me the conviction to really play with it and unfold it. So that's a little bit of where it came from theory, and then through that, playing with it is what I really want to invite, is a few ideas of how to play with it. And there's so ways where you can play with foundation, but if we're looking at the loops, we're really looking at a sagittal movement. So I want to play with two positions of the foot, which is dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Which is basically when we're in this position and this position. And I'll do it from here, sole of the foot, from here and here. Not so much then as we get into this position, or potentially even an eversion position. But we stand on the foot. So when we have the foot like this, it's a very common place to find ankle loop. The idea that from the center of the ankle, we draw back and we extend towards the heel. And there's a drawing up that actually lifts the arch. And allows, in many ways, these tendons, which most of us, because we're set, in a chair-sitting population, tend to be overactive, and we don't do as much squatting as maybe other cultures do, or we did in previous traditions. To get those to somewhat soften a little bit. Actually, quite a few of our poses can really utilize the benefit of ankle loop in this position. So this is the position we use for like an upward dog is one of the main ones that we use it for. But then, as we move from chaturanga, there's a sliding onto the top of the foot. It's also just the position the foot's in, say, child's pose. So I want to move into two hands-on. One will use the belt, and then we'll use the block. But first, I want to invite us all to just do a few movements to get acquainted with the ankle. Just see what it feels like, how does it move, And what I'm after, especially with ankle loop, I remember it was so nice when I finally realized that it came up through the arch and it wasn't about the toes pulling this way. Because, you know, it's not that like lifting the toes, the ankle loop led me to the place where using the arch itself meant the toes could be quite relaxed and at ease, so that we could have even the ankle in a position for that organic extension. The toes are almost a reaching outward and extending from the focal point to the very edges. So I want to get a little bit clear about ankle movement versus toe movement. So this is what we'll do. Hopefully you can hear, and I'll show you, and then I hope you can do it. So I'm coming way over here. I'll talk a little slower. But it's two ways. We can point our toes and lead with our toes and pull our toes back. Or we can use our ankle, the movement of the ankle, and see how little the toes can respond. So we could use both as well. We could push the heel and pull the toes. We could pull in the heel and extend the toes. But instead, how much can we actually get this movement of the ankle without the toes having to respond so much? So another way to do it is really get the toes working. So it's almost like a windshield wiper with the toes. You pull the toes in, you pull the toes out, you pull the toes in, you pull the toes out. This first. Just feeling the toes spread, kind of getting them active and engaged. And in some ways, even seeing if the ankle can relax. This is an activation of the toes, getting them working, giving them a moment to be what it engages and initiates. And then after you let that settle, then you go with the extension and retraction and see how soft the toes can be. If they can follow and in some ways relax. It's getting clear how we can move right through this space in the subtalar joint. What's happening beneath the bones of the foreleg, in the original bones, or the first bones that take the weight from that lower leg into the heel, into the earth, and then also this way through the foot. So give that a moment, feel that out. And then also let that rest. And the idea on that, I'll come close just in case it's easier to hear. The idea on that is I want to do a little bit of a before and after. So we'll try that again after we do these two ways to ignite ankle loop. So the first one is we're going to use our belt. And it's not different and any different from what we do in Supta Padangusthasana, except for the placement of the foot. So often we put the belt somewhere on the bottom of the foot, and we do a pull downward, which can get some of this activation here, but often we also really pull our toes down, which I'm going to suggest actually clogs the flow of ankle loop and potentially even the knee. I'm not even going to go for the heel, actually, because I feel that if we have one sense of ankle loop, it's this direction. It's when we go from front to back and we go towards the heel. So I'm going to switch the position to the back like this, so that we actually get the initiation to happen from the front of the ankle back, and then also from the belt towards the sole of the foot. So what this is my arms have to stretch way up towards the ceiling so that I'm not pulling down because I'd lose the belt. Instead, if I get it there, I'm pulling the foot overhead a little bit like this. And in that way, if I lean my ankle into the belt, lean the back of my heel, my Achilles, I start to actually feel a softening and engaging that allows deep, deep work in the shins and deep, deep work in the thighs. So here's the pose.
Julia, can I ask you to describe the vector line of the energy of that belt placement again?
Yeah, totally. So the belt is positioned here with the arms pulling the leg this way, which both allows the ankle to initiate. So remember, it initiates from the center by moving back. It then moves down towards the heel and then we get it to come forward towards the front body, and then it lifts the arch. So the belt position, by pulling this way, helps us get the front to back and the back to front to open up, to allow that to start to take place, rather than just the down and the up of the arch. And so that's the idea of the position of the foot. And to hopefully get some deeper work in the calf muscles and in the quad muscles, okay? So that's the one way to open it up in what is this angling of the foot, which is truly actually an extension of the ankle. Because a true flexion of the ankle, here's the soft surface of the foot. This is a true flexion. So this is why we ended up, here's the soft surface of the ankle, here's the soft surface of the knee. You know, this is how the babe comes out, like this. So this is technically extension that we learn to extend in the ankle. So I want to give it another one in child's pose with the block. So this is also came about for folks that couldn't get their hips down, but upon doing it myself, I just loved it. So often there's a sense of the weight, if you look at the trajectory of the block, from into the front of the ankle. But I'm going to turn the block like this. So that similarly, now the trajectory, and it's not on my sitting bones, it's on the back of my thigh, starts to take the weight from the back of the foot towards the toes. So I can take the block, and it's a higher child's pose, but what it allows me to feel is the weight going through these bones out towards the foot. So it just aligns the bones here and gives a nice settled quality. And it actually will relieve the ankle. It might even help some people find a little bit more space and softening in their knee. And a folding here. Maybe a block under their forehead, where they come low.
Julia, in that position, what about people whose top of their foot, the front of the ankle, is not as open as yours? You have a very open front of the ankle. What would you suggest for that?
A blanket roll under the front is also fine, or just a blanket. So at first, for some people, it's almost like the first time you put the weight on the crown of their head, they're like, whoa, that's super sensitive. So some of it might just be sensitivity, so just a whole blanket under everything from knee to the top of the foot. But some, yes, that the ankle won't go into that, I've been working on this for a long time to get this action going. It's almost a ballerina foot, right? Or, so if you need to put a blanket roll in this space here, so that it begins to settle and these tendons begin to allow that, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with child's pose, right? It's not always the knees. For a lot of people, it's the movement in the ankle itself to get into that position. But this will actually be a way in, because it sets off the sense of how weight travels through the foot, through the bones. Instead of, often what we get stuck in is a lot of weight and tension in the tendons around the foot. And it's a really good position to practice. One of the other places, once people start to get used to it, is doing a lunge on the top of the foot versus doing, and what that invites is that you start to get the weight through, you get really, really clear action in shin and quads. So it just really starts to set up the opening of ankle loop to bring up shin loop, to bring up thigh loop, and to allow that really strong action that pelvic loop can give towards organic extension. So if you were able to actually do that now, I would invite, if you got to do both sides and get the block there, to try the ankle work again. Can you get your toes to relax a little bit more when you go for the extension and retraction of the heel? To not pull so much on the toes, to push so much on the toes. This is a before and after. Or I'd like to do it in class sometimes, and you get a lot of the wows. The other thing I want to say about that, especially the practice on the top of the foot, is that creating, or even just the understanding that this is the soft surface of the foot, is that this space, when it has a sense of containment, or when we get what ankle loop offers us, which is a lift from the arch, even when it's extended like this space lifting here, also this space lifting, not being pulled up from the top, but actually the arch, the fascia on the bottom of the foot, being able to have its own sense of lift and buoyancy. We get into almost, well, what buoyancy gets to is the, like a diaphragm action. So a lot of what can initiate, because there's so many things about the loops where it's about the softness of these depths. So if you get it from the sole of the foot up, you can also get it in then way that this moves in a little bit, and there's a little bit of a buoyancy there in the depth of the hip crease. So you start to get into what Open to Grace also allows, especially to have this in the foot, is just it can change everything. In that Open to Grace has this natural descent and rise to it. There's the settling that takes place, and then in some ways it brings up muscle energy, but it's all from the allowing that rise takes place. And so the Achilles tendon it just has so much potential rebound there. And the ability to take tension out, you can see it in the hand, the ability to take tension out from this surface in the hand and in the foot can really allow, it's similar in the hand, this joining here of tissue that can create buoyancy into the body, a spaciousness and a resilience that Open to Grace invites us to find. So that's a lot, or maybe it's not, maybe it's just the tip of the iceberg. But I think that's what I'll say for now. Any questions, or however you guys want to lead the movement?
That was fantastic. Thank you so much for, what I would like before we go into a discussion is, could you do just like a 4 point recap? Some people joined late and they didn't get the whole beginning. So yeah,
happy to do that. Yeah. In some ways this all came about for the desire to have the loops of the lower body start with Open to Grace and be able to end with organic extension, because that's what happens in the upper body. And the benefit of that in terms of utilizing the loops as cogs, so really having one set off the rest, and then seeing how ankle loop just really works so well as a foundational pose and as what initiates or sets off the trajectory of the principles, because they are sequentially organized. So that's how this in theory came about. And then just the discovery of what that allows in terms of really even then shin loop feeling that much deeper or more powerful, thigh loop feeling that much deeper or more powerful, and organized from an Open to Grace standpoint. For me, it was a big shift from the tendency to lift toes to try to get my arches active in my feet, to really utilizing ankle loop to bring that up through the principle of Open to Grace. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to, Lisa wrote a very profound comment here, and that has several points in it and some subtlety and nuance. So Lisa, if you don't mind going into your comment, because I think you could probably do it better than I can.
I'll just read it and then I'll let Julia go deeper, because Julia is very, very deep and connects a lot of dots. She and I had a fun day in New York City together over a year ago, and she's quite deep. So here we go, Julia. The movement of the ankle is often considered talus glide, and talus is a bone with no attachments, and it relies on its environment to move. And I think that's really an Open to Grace moment, to rely on other.
Yeah, lovely.
I'm going to stop there because there's more. As you kept talking, I would just type in more questions or thoughts. I'll stop there because I know you have thoughts on that for sure.
Yeah, talus is a beautiful place. It's especially in some ways it's super clear on the top, which is how we're oriented to what the talus is. A saddle, which is almost a very simple movement. It's just the flexion and extension of the ankle. And so in some ways it almost feels like, oh, this is what it does. But if you look at the underside of the talus, there's actually 3 different places in which it has a joint surface with the heel and with some of the bones in front. So it's really a balanced place. It's a beautiful space. And it has a lot of this kind of action. It can relate a little over here, a little over here, a little over here, kind of between those 3 points. So, you know, getting into that is, I mean, there's so much of our vestibular system is organized around this space too. So yeah, you know, how do we orient? Like, how do we orient to the earth? How do we orient upward from there? Talus is great. And so it can get us to the heel. It can get us towards the front of the foot. Also, because it doesn't have any ligaments I mean, it really relies on then the muscles, the 4 corners of the muscles that come up on the front and the back to encase it. So it's why 4 corners of the feet are also extremely useful in other contexts, because of the way in which it allows it a steadiness there when you need that steadiness, where you're like, this is where I'm going to stand. Like, this is it. Like, I'm committing. So it's a juncture that is, What else?
And the other thing I said, I was, as you were talking about that belt placement at the back of the heel, I really think it's interesting for organic energy, because often heel bones, like the calcaneus bone itself, gets jammed forward in people. And, you know, other than like opening up the arch, you know, working on opening that tissue in there in the plantar fascia, the arch, you know, you're kind of like, well, how do I organically teach that? So the belt placement at the back of the heel is like a really creative, it's hard, right? A lot of brain power to that part of the foot, but brilliant.
Yeah, it's really lovely. I also, and now I'm kind of kicking myself for not bringing a foot, the bones of the foot, because what you can also just see is from the back of the heel, there is this wave-like motion towards the front of the foot, and on the inner edge and also on the outer edge. And so, as you know, as much as we want weight to come back and down, from there it goes over, you know, it goes over this arch to the front of the foot. And so you're just, it can be so aligning for the bones, and so softening for the tissues, so that the tissues aren't gripping, so tendons aren't gripping in pelvic, and you allow the tissues to be then very, very receptive. And so again, it just gets us right into open to grace, like just the reality of here I am standing, and you know, down through the bones and releasing that, and all that can come up from there, then the resilience of the tissues to organize, then what you're going to make of that. Yeah, totally.
And now I had a question, a very specific question. When you're in that lunge position with top of the foot down, this is my last one. What cues, like if you were in class and you were teaching that lunge top of the foot down and you wanted to specifically cue ankle loop, what would you give us?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Mostly what I would do, because it can all of a sudden localize into too much weight in a place that's not used to getting weight, which is the bones of the top of the arch, is in some ways the cue of the pressing a little bit back to the heel and allowing the weight to come there. But then in some ways, how quickly can you get shin loop and thigh loop going? Like, how quickly can you recruit that and travel it up so that you distribute the potential weight, like overweight bearing, on a new place that's not quite ready for it, or the bottom of the foot will cramp, these kinds of things. So how quickly can you distribute that up the leg? So but that's the beauty of it. If you open to grace and you get ankle loop going, all of a sudden, like, it opens up the pathway right to the focal point, like thigh loop, all these other loops arise so that you reach the pelvis quite quickly. So there's 2 ways to do it. First, is to, tell them that they don't have to get the knee up off the floor, that just the action of it can be where they're at. So, you allow it to be in stages. And the second is to have them really use their front leg. So again, you just slightly get the weight off, and then they can play with it a little bit more. So I would normally have 2 blocks so that they have both hands around this front foot, and this front leg gets really active. You know, you could get the ankle loop going here. You know, pull the ankle back, feel the heel lengthen, let the arches lift all the way up into here, and then they can start to be like, oh, I can get a little bit of this going. So you press the top of the foot down, and as quickly as you can, lift the muscles up the leg, all the way up the leg into the depth of the pelvic focal point. So you can get the lift of the thigh loop going. You press down and you quickly lift, and you'll get more of the muscles on the front of the shin active than most people will have ever used. And you'll get nice deep action in the quads. They'll really organize that. Of course, what you have to be careful of is the tendency for the foot to fall out like this. So this is the thing with the loops, is you want to stay on this trajectory, not this one. But that's the beauty of it, because as they start to feel that out, you can imagine everyone coming down through chaturanga, coming out with their feet, turned in, toes turned in, all the way to the outer ankle. So there's even pigeon pose. I play with this a lot more. The front leg of pigeon pose, rather than trying to get to here, where a lot of people will again put the weight here. I really practice this volume of the top of the foot and pressing down through here, even in a more narrow stance. But instead of this, really rolling to the front of the shin, really rolling under the top of the foot to get this part of ankle loop active, where you get volume here on the top of the foot instead of it all leaking to the outer ankle. So it also helps to really align then, so that those muscles, as we were saying, holding the talus, can keep the pathway really clear instead of it, falling to the inner arch, falling to the outer arch. This gives it a stable position there in the center. So volume on the top of the foot. Yeah. It's one thing I say a lot. Yeah.
So is that volume on the top of the foot only when the foot is extended? I mean, so when you're in a standing pose,
yeah,
how do you do that?
Yeah, volume, then it's different, because that becomes, when the foot's extended, that's the foundation. When you're on the sole of the foot, it's more the way that the toes can elongate and the arch can start to find its lift. Yeah, so that from the weight in the heel, from the ability to lengthen out through the front of the foot, the arches start to find its buoyancy. And again, how quickly can that lead to the calf, to the shin muscles activating, the quad, how then just like set it off, like let it go, make its way all the way up. In a way that it's, sometimes we get into great detail of these, but sometimes it's just like the way that it happens. It just, you set this off and it arises right to the focal point, and then that allows us to get back down and out, and then all of a sudden ankle loop is also organic energy, and then they're pulsing at the same time. Then we get that beautiful, that space of the pathway is clear and the energy moves. Yeah.
I find that the ankle loop is like that child that nobody talks about. The one that's too much work. Yeah, I love all my kids, but that one is like a whole nother level of concentration and attention and focus that I need to give, So yet when I teach a class and we do an ankle loop class and every pose is about ankle loop, that's the difference between like Tadasana and suddenly everyone's sweating in Tadasana, right? It gives you like the calf loop is really, it kind of fades, it dissolves if there's not an ankle loop for it to move against, right? For it to like extend up out of. And so when we don't do ankle loop, which a lot of us, I don't know if we can get everyone to raise your hands, but how many of us teach ankle loop on a regular basis? It's just like, but I know that those classes are like, and then the students also have to be at a level where they're ready to do that level of focus, which is, difficult.
Well, and I'm totally right there with you. But that's also where part of me comes back to, again, just where does it initiate? Like if we have to do 3 things in the legs, like if we can do a whole class, we do 3 things. We just get this sense of how this area moves back, and there's a split of energy towards the earth and up. We get the thigh to move back, we get that split of energy, then we get the waistline to move back and we extend. You know, you just get these moments. I mean, there's also so many other, you know, the ways of doing it. You know, you can do hands. You know, you can have your hands here. If they, you know, knees even bent, the pulling back, or this one, you know, just what does that mean to initiate here? The ways that will lift the sole, the front of the foot up a little bit on a blanket roll. You know, so there's all the kind of ones I feel maybe are still new to some people, but ones that I've heard for many years that like initiate there, and then initiate at the hip, and then initiate at the waistline. And it's not so far off, you know. It's right there actually. Yeah, totally. Yeah, ankle. Yeah, I mean, still, even though I'm like I found gold, it's open to, you know, I still forget about it constantly. You know, I'm just trying to work up here, that kind of thing. Totally. Yeah.
Julia, can you show the child's pose block? Because when I got down just now to try it, I felt like the block was jamming the front of my ankle down.
Yes, this is the absolutely key to the pose. It's all about the trajectory of the block. So the block shows the angle. If it's pointed like this, the weight's going to go this way. So it points more like this. And so let me show you when we do it. People will even try, you know, they'll come up and they'll want to sit like this. This is the weight coming down into the ankle space. That's not really what we're after. We want to angle it so it takes the pathway from heel towards toes, and it allows this to start to open up, this movement of the ankle loop. Can you see the difference?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah? Great. Yeah, because even, people will feel a block and they'll be like, oh great, I can come up and sit. And if they sit like this, the block will kind of fall out from under them. So it's not a sitting position. It's not meant to help support virasana or something like that. It's really about the ankle. So it's, the place I use it is child's pose, and all time when they need a break, you know, just honoring, like we do a lot of standing poses, folks. So they take a child's pose and you just invite this block here, and it just resets and opens up the ankle space, gives it a little bit of a break, and allows them to come back into the next wave of standing poses. You know, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking to clarify that. I hope it's clear.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Please feel free to unmute and chime in.
Julia, can you address people lifting their toes in standing poses to initiate muscle energy?
Yeah. There's a way that it works. It really does work, but in the idea of this then kind of open to grace, it somewhat leaves out the downward settling that open to grace invites. It kind of picks up, for me, in my experience, too much. And as much as they'll get a muscle energy going, it'll tend to be a bit more superficial. You know, in the same way you could just pull your kneecaps up, and yet you're then, in some ways, it's the muscle energy that we're not after. It's just very muscly. It doesn't get the way that we have 3 elements to muscle energy, where it gets muscle to move towards bone. You know, it moves things towards midline, like we get these highways of the bone as the energetic core towards the focal point and away from the focal point. So in terms of the other thing about it is that then in some ways you have to always have your toes lifted, and the second you let that go, most people will drop again into their arches. So there's a way in which if we can find this pathway through the talus, since it's now been named, if we can find this pathway through to the heel and out through the front of the foot, really using the pathway of the bones, they can start to, because it gets towards their vestibular system, get a sense of like, oh, you know, where is my weight in my ankles? Does it go down into the arch instead of through the bones of the feet? Instead of like that, well, if I'm going to be engaged, I have to pick everything up, and then I turn and I have to do something else, and it drops. So it's really the invitation for it to retrain or to be something that we can really rely on. And the last thing we want, maybe not the last thing, but that to have our toes lifted all the time is a strain or an amount of tension that that means that they're holding bones and they're holding bones in place that really gravity can help organize. And we really want to utilize that. So it's huge, you know, in terms of our energy and then what attention and whatnot. So yeah, I get it sometimes, you know, for that can you feel the lift of the arch? And then I'm also a fan of not saying beginners can't understand subtlety. So I don't mind throwing beginners also into the question, at least, because if they start sensing like, well, what would that be like? I have no idea, I can't feel it. But if they start to visualize it, you know, the pathways can start to open up even from that. So I don't shy away from throwing them in the deep end too. We never know really what people's movement patterns are like, or where they're coming from, and so on and so forth. And yeah, so yeah, I don't. Every once in a while, there's a moment where I'm like, yeah, let's all lift all our toes. You know, it comes up, but then then in that case, don't lift your big toe higher than your pinky toe. You know, so now what are you gonna do? You know, so you only can lift them so high if they only lift as high as your pinky toe. You don't get the tendons on the big toe to over engage. Yeah, it's a great area. I mean, it's like one of those amazing places that we centered all the way down through this. You know, we're not built like a building, you know, so there's something about the way in which it can come down into such a small space and hold the you know, ever broadening focal points and the depth of who we are, and let us touch down on the earth, you know. The beauty of it is yeah, strikes awe. There was one other thing that I just thought to. The other thing I like to then play with also, and this is not tonight's topic, but just to maybe even send you off with something to think about, is then the way that kidney loop, to have a footprint in the left side and the right side, you know, to really look for that kind of depth and let kidney loop have a similar kind of ability to stand there. So again, how much do we move how much do we have this kind of front to backness that the ankle loop and the sole of the foot can offer? And, you know, that kidney loop is the way that we really stand. We have a foundation for the upper body in that front to back movement. And then the lift of the back, you know. So, you know, can you stand in your left and you stand in your right? To get shoulder, you know, and, you know, because what do we know about shoulder loop? The second we put muscle energy on in the upper body, we tend to lose the foundation of kidney loop. That space shortens. So to bring that parallel up, then it can really also inform a lot about how to use the upper body loops and have kidney loop be a place where we stand in the upper body. That also, that came up since so sorry to bring up kidney loop, but there, you know, there's the just the invitation to take it to the upper body. You know, they have that way of playing with one another, or showing us more about ourselves.
So
yeah.
To add to that, Julia, before we leave, you define an arch lifting kind of loop, and in that arch lifting moment, the foot has a shortening effect. And then you're describing a lengthening. You're saying the same thing with the kidney loop and the footprint in the kidney loop, right? There's like this shortening moment, and then there's like, oh yeah, and also there's the lengthening.
Yeah.
So if you can describe that moment in the ankle loop, like how, you know what I mean? Like how to move into both. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so now take kidney loop and how does it inform ankle loop? So yeah, I mean, that's good. I mean, in some, the first thought is actually that in some ways the open to grace, the activation of the, you know, I'm just calling it the fascia, you know, of the foot there. You know, it has a name, but, you know, maybe names aren't what it's about. But that lifting of the fascia there, this kind of buoyancy there, really takes us towards a focal almost like a suctioning action. It's the way when we play with kind of palming in our hands, we can get into our armpits all of a sudden. We like hold a grapefruit in our armpits. The same way when you get that little bit of action of the drawing in of the sole of the foot, you get up into the pelvic focal point, and then you extend back down, and that especially organic energy then, if the toes aren't overly active, it just, they stream, they reach, they can radiate in a way that can give that kind of length. And that is the moment when after organizing the muscles towards the bone and drawing the focal point, you then root down through the bones and extend quite active in a way that when there's an organic energy. You really take the force and move it through the bones and reach through the toes. And the way that then, of course, then your base is as broad as energetically it can be. It really can radiate totally. But I'll have to think more about how kidney loop can inform ankle loop.
That can be your next presentation. More queries. And I really think these types of conversations require us to embody the practice. It's one thing to have you present it online to us, and either we're here live with you or watching a recording. The other thing is we have to take these ideas and actually practice them and see what it means for us. So a big part of what we offer is that everyone tonight or watching it later as a recording, practice before you teach it. Practice to see how it feels in your body and embody the teaching, embody the loops, and it'll take you into a deeper inquiry.